Good morning, my admirable friend. I hope this finds you well. It is cold here, and it is kind of sleeting. With luck, you're sleeping soundly, and we'll be waking up in an hour or two to face hopefully a beautiful sunrise with cats and chai and as much skill as you can muster. No sunrise here. Well, obviously the sun rose, or the earth moved its shoulder down underneath the sun, if you like. And I can actually feel the temperature dropping, and of course the sound of that half-frozen rain hitting the concrete is a sound that is cold in and of itself. It's amazing how these things suggest things. I was thinking about how very often we have parts of our minds, members of the committee if you like, or just aspects of ourselves, which want to pursue certain things that are very unskillful. And it's interesting to kind of analyze that, because I find, and this is in keeping with the teachings, that most of the time when I think I want to do something that I know is like an unskillful thing to do, when I analyze why I actually want to do it, only a very small part of my mind is tied up with whatever pleasure that unskillful activity might bring. And when you look at it very closely, the unskillful activity brings actually very, very little pleasure. It's usually a very small amount compared to the amount of time and effort taken in getting the pleasure. So why pursue it? Especially if it's going to be unskillful, it's going to have negative consequences to myself and the people around me. And then I realized that a lot of the reason why I wanted to pursue this unskillfulness had to do with the way I had an image of myself. There's an old saying, and this is the basis of all advertising: if you consume a symbol, you take on its power. If you consume a symbol, you take on its power. And this is part of our innate psychology, I think. It's the basis of like advertising for beer. That's a classic. I'm sure you've grown up, and a lot of us have grown up with advertisements for beer, television and magazines and so forth. And the idea is you're not selling the beer itself, but you're selling the idea of the kind of person you'll be if you drink that beer. And they usually show images of people sharing beers together in a group. So you're showing people, if you drink this beer, you're going to be a popular part of a group, and a group of not just anyone, but people that are really cool and handsome and pretty, and you want to be like them. You want to be cool and handsome and pretty. And you can do this if you consume this beer, just like they're doing. And actually, that has nothing at all to do with drinking beer. The pleasure of which is very limited when you think about it. But it's this larger idea of ourselves that we can generate. Oh, it's coming down now pretty hard. It's this larger idea of ourselves that we can generate through a becoming. Just drinking the beer helps allow us to slip into a becoming when, we're just like those really cool people consuming the beer. And this is true of anything. Any symbol that they try to sell us. Any symbol that we're convinced that if we consume will give us its power. So when people consume a symbol, they feel that they take on its power. So on examination, I usually find that the reason that part of me says, oh, go do this, go do that, you should do this, a lot of it is tied up with a becoming, with a self-image. Becoming is taking on an identity in a little fantasy world that you create, in a thought world. And we spend most of our time doing this. A lot of modern psychology is, you just create this really good identity so you think well of yourself. But unless this identity is based, there's that word again, is solidly based in your inner self, and unless you're looking to have a feeling of self-worth that is in and of itself skillful, eventually it's just all going to fall apart. I think you can hear the sleet coming down now. It's definitely some kind of sleet, and it's coming down harder and harder. My goodness. So the mind wants to think well of itself, and it's given these short circuits. Here, drink this beer, and you'll be there. Smoke this kind of cigarette. Buy this kind of car. And our society and culture pushes that the answer to this is consumption, giving someone else money. And that's not a coincidence, because this is something that advertising executives have learned long, long ago, and before them, political propagandists. But it's ultimately based on illusion, becomings, these ideas you have in your head about yourself that, for most of us, have absolutely no basis in reality at all. But on analysis, it's very interesting to see that A lot of what drives us towards these things that are supposedly so pleasurable has little to do with the pleasure itself, but rather the becomings that come around it and the reinforcement it makes. Because, as I say, usually the pleasure is very short-lived, and it very often has negative results that far outlast the pleasurable results. And well, I started talking about beer advertising. That's one of the most obvious ones, and it's a good example there. Beer, it's one of those things that really tastes awful, but we train ourselves to like it. And you can go to the bar and you see your friends and you have a beer and you have another beer, and that's okay. And you feel a little better then. Then you go to a third or fourth beer or fifth or sixth, however many you drink, maybe a couple of shots with it. And yeah, things usually get confused. You know what it's like to drink too much. Most of my listeners would. So the actual fun of drinking the beer only lasts for the short time that you're drinking it, and usually only the beginning of that. After that, well, very often you can't remember much. You often say and do things that are very unskillful and that you'll regret later. And of course, there are the physical consequences of imbibing this stuff. The next day, our liver has to work hard and all of our organs to recover from having this foreign substance in our body. And the good old hangover. And along with the hangover comes a grogginess and a period of time when you're just not going to be at your best. So this can actually affect you for days afterward. And all for half an hour of fun drinking, because usually after the first half hour, meh. And it all stems from wanting to consume a symbol and take on its power. You want to be like those cool people in the commercial. And for a while you can feel like you're taking on their archetype, but it's a dead end. It's a dead end. If we want to look for examples, of course, we should look to the noble ones. We should look to the people on the path that we're on, the people that are further along and to whom we can look for an example and for assurance. Part of our path is to comprehend things. We look at what our mind is doing so we understand what's going on, because 99% of people, 99% of the time, have no idea what their mind is up to. They just let it go, let it go, let it go, and they don't want to look at it. In fact, it's very scary to look at our own minds. We see things there we don't want to see. I told you my own path. I spent years getting to the point where I could stare and look at my own mind and give myself the sort of clarity that I met with when I first started talking to you. So you have a great advantage there, but of course I'm sure that you worked up to your clarity through just as difficult a process as I've worked on mine. Our path to the path. We both were on a path to the path. And now we have found the capital T, capital P, the path. Or the path. And that's an interesting point too. The Buddha would call that our karma. Our karma brought us to this path. And our karma prepared us for this path through certain life experiences that taught us these things. And of course, most learning is not pleasant. Some is, but most isn't. So yeah, but when we examine our minds and we see the motivations and the ideas behind it, well, again, it's sort of like that old saying, once I come to tell the story to someone else, when you start actually looking at these things and taking it apart, you start realizing how specious a lot of these arguments you make to yourself are. And very often, as the Buddha says, all you've got to do is comprehend these things, look at them, and they fall away. Why the hell would I do that? And that's very often the way with these unskillful actions. When I look at, well, I want this pleasure, that pleasure, but then you say, well, the pleasure itself is very, very short. Look at all the other negative consequences. So really, what are you looking for here? And you figure out, well, I want this sense of self. I want this idea of myself as someone who does this. It has to do with my self-respect. It has to do with my image of myself. Well, that's becoming. And I realized that there's a part of me that wants to engage in these activities, even though I don't even really like the activities, or that I don't really want to do the activities, or that the activities bring up such a limited amount of pleasure. And why bother? Why bother? And the becomings will say, yeah, but you'll have this wonderful feeling when you do that. And it's like, yeah, okay, but that wonderful feeling is a very, very short time. and you've got all of the energy that you waste getting ready to do something, and then all the energy that you waste recovering from something. And yeah, you might do that shot of whiskey, and that gives you a nice warm feeling inside, and it's relaxing, and you do another shot, and that's really good, and you're one of the cool people that drinks whiskey, and you think back to the magazine ad of there's a poet sitting at a table with a glass of whiskey, and he's creating a great poem, and he's a literary man, and all he has to do is drink whiskey and scribble on paper, and he supports himself and all this sort of thing. Well, that's just an advertisement. It's not real. And you're not that poet. You're just some drunk guy. And again, I'm just using alcohol as an example. Think of anything unskillful. There's plenty to choose from, plenty of ways to break precepts. But I think that's like just a very easy example, very obvious, most people can connect to. But I think it applies to just about anything that we want to do that we can look at and say, that's unskillful, why do I want to do that? And of course, some of it's just realizing it's unskillfulness in the first place. Well, my admirable friend, this is getting like Polonius's beard, so I'd better cut it short. But I hope, as I said, this finds you well, and God willing, you and I will be talking later on today. A day in which hopefully you awaken to cats and sun, chai, and as much skill as you can muster. These are the days that try men's souls, as the saying is, and women's souls for that matter. These are the days when we need as much skill as we can muster, all the time. And I think every day is sort of like that too. But there are times when events and things point this up to us a little more. You were saying at one point that Callum was lamenting the fact that he simply did not know how much time he had left. And this is true of all of us. It's just pointing it out to him. But his situation is no different from yours and no different from mine. We all have this sentence of death hanging over us. We all of us do. And we all of us have no idea when it will come, but we know that it will come. And so we need to be prepared. We need to be prepared. And that's what we're doing. This is what we work for, so that we can be steadfast. And yeah, and as you've probably noticed, a lot of times the universe builds us up just enough to be able to throw another whammy at us. But that's how we learn. All right, my friend, I'm babbling. I am going to take my leave, albeit reluctantly. But as I said, God willing, we will be talking later on today. So until then and always, please know that I do send you white light and metta, my most admirable friend. Metta.